Ultimately, what I find in my work with leaders and others, it's a question: can you line your heart up to your work? Can you really get that aligned? How can I help others in the firm reach their full potential today and really become more actualized as lawyers and human beings? Love is a thoughtful, choiceful response. It is a way of being, and it is a way of doing. Love is not what you do, it's how you do it.
Hi, and welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. My name is Ariane Rice, and I am eager to share this conversation with my friend and colleague, John Frisch. John is an executive leadership coach and development consultant who works with individuals, companies, and organizations to help them grow as leaders and to achieve more of their potential. A passion he developed while he was chairman and CEO of the Mid-Atlantic law firm Miles and Stockbridge. He frequently delivers keynote talks on leadership and leads workshops inside companies and organizations, exploring leadership competencies and culture change. And that's how I came to know and work with John. And that story is a part of today's conversation. I found an immediate connection with a thought partner and fellow seeker who really understood, as I did, the connection between spirituality and work. And how we do what we do is of primary concern to people who are seeking purposeful vocational lives. John is how I discovered leadership coaching and a whole new way of continuing to live my vocation to build people up in love in the world. And as you saw from the title of this episode, love, my friends, is a key component of this conversation. Love not as an emotion. Love is not an emotion. And you might be surprised to hear that as a statement, or it might sound perfectly appropriate to you. Love is an intention. Love is a value. Love is a practice, a promise, a choice. Emotions and feelings come and go like weather patterns. But love, real love, does not. I love my work when I don't feel good about it for whatever reason. I definitely love my husband, even though he can tick me off at times, and I know the same is true for him. Same with my good friends, same of course with my daughter and my family. Love is steadfast because I've chosen it to be. Love is a commitment I have made to a relationship, an obligation, a community, a value. And I know of no better time to be sharing a conversation focused on how we make that commitment in and to our work in the world than today. So I want to thank John for making the time and engaging so thoughtfully and honestly with my questions. And my friends, I hope you are inspired, encouraged, and challenged to wonder just a little more frequently when confronted with a possibility or some uncertainty. I hope you wonder to yourself, what would love do? Okay. Thanks for being here, and now let's get to today's conversation.
Okay.
Hi there, John Frisch, and welcome.
Hey, Ariane, it's great to be with you.
It is so wonderful having you here. I have been waiting for quite some time to host you in a conversation on this podcast, so I'm grateful that you're making time for it. Lots of things going on in the world around us.
Oh my.
Many things.
I'm balancing my need to be informed with my need to stay sane, and it's a very difficult balancing act.
It is.
I'll leave it at that.
It is. And what better way to stay sane than to have intentional and thoughtful conversations around how we show up and live our values in the world. So with that, I would love it if you could introduce yourself and say a little bit about who you are and how you live your vocation in the world.
Great. I'm John Frisch. I'm 66 years old. The was a lawyer at Miles and Stockbridge for a long time and chaired the firm for 15 years. At the end of my tenure, I separated from the firm left the firm to pursue a career in executive leadership coaching. And that was really born out of work that I had done with my own leadership coach towards the end of my tenure as chairman. And one of the things that we worked on was discerning my values and my purpose and how that could help me have a really fulfilling second chapter, because I had given up my practice to lead the firm. And at the age when I retired, didn't really want to go back and rebuild a sophisticated merger and acquisition practice. That's something of a young person's game. So this was an opportunity to do something different. And it all became really clear when I did this work. It became really clear, I think, what I really should do, what I feel a calling to do.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more? Because while it may be a young person's game, I also think there might be some other discrepancies between starting a quote unquote mergers and acquisitions practice and going into adult leadership development.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was really burned out as a leader about probably at year 12 or 13. And when I did this work with the coach, she said something really powerful, which was, the antidote to being burned out or to fatigue is not rest, it's being wholehearted. And so we did some really interesting work to discover really where my heart was. And some of that was some core value work. So my top 3 or 4 core values are personal growth, authenticity, love, and spirituality. Those are my 4 core values. And she challenged me in the work that we did together, to discern a purpose, which is, I've come to understand for me, is to help others achieve their full potential and to grow into the human being and to the leader that their God intends them to be. And so that's different than practicing law, certainly in a transactional way.
I'm sure it's different. And a lot of people I know go into law for vocational calling type reasons. So I'm wondering if you think back to that original desire, what was it? Or did you know, were you doing something for someone else? What made you enter?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, the way you asked that question. So I had, at one point when I went to law school, I thought I wanted to be a criminal lawyer for some altruistic kind of reasons. And also because an uncle that I admired was a criminal lawyer. And if I really were to look back, I had a wonderful career and I loved the transactional work. It was creative. It brought a lot of value to clients. Clients at the end of sophisticated transactions would feel good about paying our fees, which is not always the case with clients and lawyers. And so there was, I formed a lot of relationships. There was a relational aspect to a business practice and a counseling aspect that I really liked. So yeah, there are lots of reasons and I know many lawyers that are very satisfied, that like that transactional work or that litigate and love the intellectual challenge of it. It's incredibly challenging intellectually. So I think, as I said earlier, I think ultimately what I find in my work with leaders and others, it's a question, can you line your heart up to your work? Can you really get that aligned? For me, what happened was my coach said, when we did this work and discerned this is where my purpose and really what makes me jump out of bed in the morning, she said, look, why don't you see that as your calling at the firm? And rather than getting up in the morning and saying, how can I help my partners make more money, which felt a little empty to me, why don't you get out of bed and think, how can I help others in the firm reach their full potential today and really become more actualized as lawyers and human beings? And she said, by the way, if you do that, they'll make more money. So it's really how you frame your work and your vocation in a way that resonates and makes you come alive.
So I love this. And I want to frame it and include burnout, because you mentioned burnout earlier. And I'm wondering what connection there may have been between whatever was happening that you'd put under a category of burnout. And then did the burnout cause you to reassess? Were you reassessing before the burnout? How did that come about that you were in that position to be supported by somebody who could help you understand that reframe?
So I noticed I was bored and burnout. There was a certain repetitiveness and emptiness, I think, to what I was finding in my work. And I also, at the same time, thought that the firm needed to develop a compelling vision and strategy to execute and to serve it for the next 5 years, and needed to develop a bench of leaders that could succeed me and others in the firm. There's a kind of a generational turnover. So all of that sort of led me to think, I really need some help with this and thinking about this. And I suppose another executive somewhere there along the line that I ran into said, boy, you really ought to find an executive coach, a really capable executive coach. And executive coaching, this was probably 12 or 13 years ago. It was around, and it was certainly prevalent, but not as prevalent as it is today. And it was just a wonderful move. I got together with my coach and said, I have 3 things I want you to do. I want to solve my burnout issue. I want to get more excited about what I'm doing and improve as a leader. I want to create a vision for the firm and develop successors. And then the last thing is, towards the end of our work, I want to discern what's next for me. So those were
how much of that type of questioning do you think is connected with maturing?
So maturing, I think some of that clearly is. I think, without getting into a whole breaking apart adult maturity theory necessarily,
I don't know. I got some time.
Yeah. I think certainly as you mature, if you are what I think I would say a seeker, and are one who wants to find meaning and wants to constantly challenge yourself as, how do I find more meaning in the world, make more meaning in the world, and have a more meaningful impact in the world, you get pulled into seeing things and taking a deeper look at all kinds of things, including yourself. Yes.
And I wonder too about, you mentioned bored. And when we think about burnout, I think we think it's felt in one way that I think most people put into an overly stressed, overly anxious, maybe even physical symptoms. Bored is also a characteristic of burnout. And I'm just wondering about, were you aware at the time of sitting with the discomfort, or did you want to just get rid of this? Did you think there was an easy solution? I'm asking the question because I've been thinking a lot about how important it is to sit with discomfort. When we're in any situation where we feel like change is needed, but we're not sure how it starts, the discomfort and being with it is really hard, but really important.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because I agree with you. And I also think we are not typically programmed until we learn how to sit with discomfort to sit with it. I think our default, until we reach that maturity or have been guided and taught, that's really important. Yeah, so I was in discomfort. I had just an intuitive sense I wasn't doing as good a job as I could. I think the firm deserved more from me. At that point, I thought, the firm, and I knew the firm needed to do some pretty significant vision and strategic planning work, and that can be lawyers don't come to that naturally. That was going to be a sell to do in the firm. So I wanted to really be equipped for that. So there was a combination of things that came together. There was there's something the firm needs to do. I should get some help thinking about that. I want to develop people. I should get some help thinking about that. And by the way, it would really help if I could become a better leader as part of that, sharpen my leadership chops and the like.
Were you surprised when she made that statement about wholeheartedness? Was that a word you were expecting?
No, she actually didn't use that phrase on me until fairly late in our work. And after I had done some of the work to even become, and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think one of the things I want us to talk about, because it was so impactful for me when you and I first started talking as colleagues, I think pretty early on in us knowing each other, you used the question, what would love do? And I remember being so surprised because I had put you in this kind of professional category. And when we first met, I was really in a clergy category. So love at work is very comfortable for me and normative.
Yeah.
But I was not at all anticipating you saying it. Since then, I'm hearing a little bit more frequently, by the way, in leadership development and even outside that. So I would love to hear from you where that statement came from, what it means, how it's evolved, all of that stuff.
All right. Miles and Stockbridge is a firm that was blessed, was when I was there, and I believe still today, has a pretty neat culture. And it wouldn't be unusual for people to end conversations in the firm over the phone, walking down the hall. I love you. Love you. It was just, there was some real genuine affection across people that was very connecting and very powerful in lots of ways. I remember when we were doing the vision and values work. One of the proudest moments of when I was leading the firm, we were focusing on core values, and all the senior leaders, there are about 21 senior leaders and the 21 leaders, senior and mid-level leaders in the firm that were working on values. And we had this outside facilitator, and a debate broke out over whether one of our values should be compassion or love. And I just sat there and thought, this is just great. And the facilitator said, I've done a lot of core value work. I rarely does love come up in core values, and I certainly didn't expect it in a law firm. And so, look, I think about love. I think love's the most powerful force in the universe. I think it's probably what will get us through. I think we need to bring as much of it into the world as firmly and as brightly and quietly and loudly, and it's all in so many dimensions over the next 4 years. I think for me, I think that's people. I constantly hear people say, "Oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." I think all we can do and all we always should do is love. I think. So I remember the question. Actually, the first time I asked that question in a serious way was to you. And we were having a conversation about a dilemma that you were facing with a colleague in your church. And I remember just leaning over to you and saying, what would love do? And I also remember the question stopping you in your tracks. And I've asked it a lot since. And it stops people in their tracks. It's, because there are a lot of pieces to it. One is what love is, right? There's a Hallmark greeting card idea of what love is.
Yeah, that's all wrong.
Yeah, that's right. I think love is for me, and I haven't actually ever defined, I haven't thought, maybe this is maybe another conversation is for you and I to think more deeply about love together in the context we're talking about, or we can do it right now. I've always felt that it was having the conversation, taking the step that is it's really in the best interest of someone. It's in an effort to serve them what they need. I'm starting to sneak up on it. It's doing the next right thing with and for someone.
Yeah. And can I just pause?
Please.
It's just too eager. I'm just too eager to not do the topic. So love, without a doubt, needs to be associated with an action, even if the action is inaction, even if the action is sitting in discomfort. I feel even the word right can be problematic. So the action that is for the good.
Correct. Yes, correct. But when I say right in the sense of appropriate, correct, not
right.
Yeah, not right versus
wrong.
Or right as an action. I think love is a choice, okay? Mm-hmm. Love is a thoughtful, choiceful response. It is a way of being, and it is a way of doing. And in its greatest sense, it's both of those kind of line up. Like I remember reading one time Richard Rohr, just this incredible theologian who's really had a lot of impact on how I think about God and spirituality. He said, love is not what you do, it's how you do it. It's really both, but it's both of those things. So I could let someone go at the firm and tell them I love them as we're having that conversation, and have that action be born out of love, because there wasn't a fit and it wasn't going to work for them at the firm. And let's turn to thinking about what could work for them and where and how. So you can do some unpleasant things I think in a loving way. My coach would always say, kind, clear, and firm, right? You can always be kind, always. Mm-hmm. There's absolutely no excuse to not be kind. You can be very clear, and sometimes you have to be firm, but you can be firm in a kind way. So that to me is part of it. But love can be really hard. There's tough love, there's soft love,
Sorry, can I interrupt again?
Yep.
One of the things that I feel is coming up right now in this conversation has to do with just how much time and intentionality an individual needs to give certain words that we make so many assumptions about. Words like love, words like kindness. And you brought up Richard Rohr, and I think of Falling Upward.
Book I often give my clients.
Yes. The second half of life wisdom that we come into, not from our successes, but from our failures and from what we learn in those experiences. And this way in which you now see and act and encourage in the world, can you share a story or an experience from that professional life or personal life, but professional life maybe, but a specific experience where you failed or messed up or made this mistake, and there was something that came of it that really now informs your coaching other people?
I made a lot of mistakes. So the mistakes I think that jump to me are mistakes about misreading someone or making assumptions about another human being. I was giving feedback one time before I learned much before I was frankly had even discerned my core values, or really this is earlier in my career. And I was giving feedback to a colleague, and I started to sort of wonder, are you depressed? I know you're going through a divorce. And, I started to make all these assumptions. They were in the midst of a divorce, and they just leveled me and said, if you want to talk about, share with me the concrete behavior you're concerned about. The whole feedback conversation was just awful. It created it really set back the relationship. That's an example.
That's a wonderful example, I think, because just sticking with, you probably didn't even know you're making, so many people, we don't know we're making the assumption. It's not even something we're aware of.
In fact, I probably thought I was probably helping the individual by giving them a convenient excuse or something to talk about. I mean, I think sometimes we can try and do too much work for others. I think that would probably be a mistake I always had, which was a bit of wanting to control an outcome. And so having my own set of assumptions or my own story and about someone and wanting to stick to that for the sake of controlling an outcome. I would say that's the biggest, those are the mistakes that I most often made.
And I see that to me, that desire to control an outcome really comes from first half of life belief of mastery, that mastery is an ability to control outcomes, to get ahead of what people need or think, to prevent the catastrophe so that you don't even have to deal with it. Whereas mastery, what do you say mastery is in second half of life?
Asking the right question. Asking the right question. So rather than coming in with an assumption, it's basically testing your assumption in the moment or with whatever comes up with someone. But it's asking the question, what's going on with you? I noticed X and Y. It impacted me this way. What's happening for you? What can you tell me about it? I think, frankly, that the most powerful leaders ask the most powerful questions and are comfortable because you're comfortable not knowing. And you're comfortable that you can be, by being really fully present and staying in the conversation, that you will get to a really good outcome because the person you're having a conversation with has a lot to bring to the table. It's not about you.
How did you learn to listen like that?
I was taught that. So I was absolutely taught that. So I did some work at Georgetown's Institute of Transformational Leadership where I learned levels of coaching as a leader. And then when I did my coach training, that, as you know from doing that yourself, you spend a lot of time on learning how to listen as a coach. And then I brought that work to the firm. So here's a really interesting thing. This interesting thing about listening. I bought a leadership development program to the firm, and lawyers were very skeptical about that. They thought, this is touchy-feely stuff. I don't want anything to do with this. You're wasting our time. We could be billing hours. Maybe it's good for you, but it's not. The rest of us don't need this. And I insisted on it. And there were about 20 people, again, this group that I mentioned earlier, went through 6 or 8 half-day sessions. They each had a coach. So it was a pretty intense leadership development program. But the second session we did on deep listening. And what happened was, after that session, a month or so after that session, people started coming into my office and closing the door and saying, hey, don't tell anybody else, but this is the best thing we've ever done. My relationship with my wife, my relationship with my children, my relationship with my husband has never been better. And that's the power of listening.
It's such an act of love to listen, to truly listen and bear witness to someone.
Richard Rohr said 2 things. Richard Rohr says that all great love, the expression of great love, is fundamentally being present, being fully present. That is core ingredient in wonderful love. Henry Newen, the really wonderful, I wish I had the quote really nearby. I'm actually I'm teaching some listening next week to a group, and I always read this quote. It's not, I just saw it earlier today, but he has this wonderful quote on listening as a form of sacred hospitality. That it's really taking someone in, really listening to them and giving them the room and having them talk 80 or 90% of the time. And you simply ask questions and take them in is really powerful.
I feel something sacred is created in those kinds of conversations. But there's a third thing. To me, it is sacred. Because it can happen between. It can't happen just one-sided.
Correct. Yeah, total 100%.
So just this morning, I realized I was in a cohort conversation with somebody who is a lawyer who does nonprofit work, supporting other lawyers. And they were talking about sort of leadership development fundamentals that they were introducing to support lawyers in burnout and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden he was like, what I've really realized as I've done this work, though, is somebody has to tell a story. Because if it's not made real through personal sharing and that quality of vulnerability being present, it's simply just not as impactful. It's simply learning that can go in one ear, not the other. So I want you to talk a little bit about, because I know you do this facilitation work and working with groups, and how this quality of listening becomes this container that's created where we make this space where people share at levels that, is incredibly deep and profound and just transformative.
So when I do work with teams, coaching teams, particularly teams that are newly formed or having issues with trust, the first thing I do is teach some kind of basic distinctions. First thing I actually do is teach listening. So the first thing I have exercises and do a thing on listening. And then, and this is often in the same day, and then I move to this wonderful exercise where each person has been asked to bring something from home that is meaningful to them and that they could talk about in a way that would give the team some insight into them and who they are. It's meaningful and why. And also to share a personal triumph and a personal challenge they overcame in childhood. And that's the homework assignment. And so I always meet with the senior leader who's leading the team and say, when we get to that part of the day, I want you to go first. And I want you to share as deeply as you can, because the leader creates the weather, right? If you are vulnerable and you go deep, you'll give others permission to do that. And in this instance, I was doing it with a group where there were actually co-CEOs. So there were two CEOs that we were working with this team, and got ready to start. And I said, okay, now we're going to start this exercise and we're going to share the personal object. Before I could call on the first CEO to start it, the woman across the table said, I'm going to go. And she just started to share. So totally just hijacked, starts to share. She shares very superficially. Woman next to her shares superficially. Guy next to her shares superficially. Gets to the CEO. He shares in a way that people are almost crying. He really goes there. Next CEO really goes there. And everybody after that, to the point that when it was finished, the first three said, can we go again? Can we go again? We didn't share deeply enough, which is just, it was like, oh my, there it is. There it is. And again, it's also, the listening also allowed in a number of cases for people to ask the follow-up question. When you shared, you got choked up. What was that about? Can you tell us more about that? It's that really deep listening. There are many times in a coaching conversation where I'll say to someone, we'll be having this conversation and they'll share something and then they might sigh. And I'll let a little minute pass and go, what's underneath that sigh? And then they go, oh, and then they just tell you everything. It just all comes flowing out. And that's where the gold is.
The thing I so love that is coming up for me as you're sharing these beautiful experiences is how in both cases, it's like you're creating something that's a value for what the clients are seeking, but you're also modeling something that can be continued. And that's why people are saying this has transformed all my relationships.
Absolutely. And
go ahead.
Yeah. And you can actually test it. So there's a method, there's some ways that you can do assessments of teams on trust and all. And when they've had that experience together, and then you may come back 6 months later and you talk to them or whatever, or you can even actually have them take this test. You can actually measure the improvement, which is really gratifying. But it's a whole way of being. One of the great principles that I was taught when I did the work at Georgetown was how you do anything is how you do everything.
Yes. Something I always told my leadership at the church.
Yeah. And so if you run around with your hair on fire and don't listen very well at work, you probably do that around your kitchen island when you're making dinner with your spouse, kids. I had a client the other day and they were talking fast and they were talking about we were coaching on inability to really connect, have these meaningful conversations. And they manage an office of a professional services firm. And I said, how fast do you walk? She just laughed and she goes, how did you know I run? And I said, I want you to walk at half speed for the next month in the office. Half speed. Slow down. How you do anything is how you do everything. Talk fast, walk fast, relate fast.
So those types of behaviors in particular, and I don't know, I'll speak for myself as a woman, but as a woman, I did believe fast talking, fast walking, intensity was a sign of mastery. It was like a first half of life understanding of what it looks like to be expert, be leadership material, be a boss. And you really, and this again comes up in the Richard Rohr book, that maturing is more a process of unlearning than it is learning.
Yeah, I think there's truth to that. Yeah.
And letting go of these models in our mind of what we're supposed to be and embracing, because it is uncomfortable to be slower. It is uncomfortable to have space in a conversation.
Yeah, it can be. Sure.
Especially if it's not something you're used to.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting there's so often you talk about the two halves of life, so often with folks who are younger in their careers, you hear them talk and use the same cadence and expression as people they work for. They're not being themselves. I would often say to folks when I've noticed it, say, hey, you don't have to be Bob. You can, or Sally, you can be you. Just be you. Trust yourself.
Do you think there's a reality that you just have to go through certain phases of trying on these different selves for at an earlier part of your life?
I do.
Simply, you can't just walk into wisdom.
No. And I think you get wisdom from failing, right? From making mistakes, watching others. You get wisdom from finding what you're attracted to in others that really matters as you get older and your sense of what matters evolves. And in doing spiritual work or work with a therapist or work with a coach. There are lots of different ways to do it.
Or all three. I say all three.
Yeah, all three. Yeah.
So I love that you brought up spiritual because that's where I wanted to go is tell me a little bit now, because you mentioned spirituality as a core value and it's come up a couple times. So what is spirituality for you? What does that mean?
So for me, it's being conscious of the divine, seeing the divine, connecting with the divine, which I call God, your higher power, knowing that there's a lot of humility in spirituality.
Say more about that, please.
We're just not that significant. It's really getting yourself out of it, serving others. It should rarely be about you. Service, servant leadership, loving leadership. I think spirituality is a call to love, fundamentally. And I also will say, the longer I've contemplated my higher power and done work to learn more and to seek more, I'm less sure about what it is. So vast, it really can't even be put into words. My organizing principle is really, my coach would always say, set an intention. How do you want to show up as a leader today? For me, at this stage of my life, where I'm not leading people every day, and even when I was a leader, this would have been the better way to do is, what would love do? What would love do today? What would love do next? And I think that's a really powerful question.
It is.
Because it ain't about you. That's
right.
For sure. It just shifts your focus.
I think that one of the beautiful things about an intentional conversation such as this, I'm not trying to speak highly of myself, but it is spiritual. It is two people seeking. We are doing something spiritual. We are doing something that is motivated by love, by putting something good into the world, by seeking to grow as colleagues, friends, but also human beings, seeking to practice principles that we believe will serve us as we maintain an energetic capacity to deal with our own individual lives and the communities that we're a part of. It is a difficult time. It just is.
Yeah. But I agree with everything you say. Spiritual, frankly, I would say this about spirituality. I went to a retreat one time and a nun said, spirituality is not something that you go off on a mountaintop, and you can. That can be a piece of it. She said, spirituality is action. It's here. It's in this conversation. It's to your point. And I've come to realize through, again, for example, the wonderful book, Universal Christ by Richard Rohr, it's in everything. God's in everything. It's in our conversation. It's in the,
yes,
we're standing on holy ground.
Yes. This is why some of us struggle to maintain one vocation in an institution.
Correct. You go where you're called.
Yes, you have to, because whatever, that's a different conversation. Okay. No.
But just I think about this, but it is a different conversation, but it's also in this way. I believe in leadership. And I think our world needs really powerful leadership. There's a shortage of leadership everywhere we turn. And I think enlightened leadership animated by really good human values and ultimately animated by love, compassion, empathy, it's really powerful. It's what the world needs. Remember, people have a hard time giving feedback in their organizations or in their relationships with their loved ones. And I remember Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I saw him a presentation that on a video of a presentation he gave on feedback. And he said, if you love the people you work with, and I hope you do, you owe them the gift of feedback. You owe them that. And you can give people feedback in a really loving way. When I teach it, I always say the people will listen to you when they know you care deeply and genuinely about them. If I say to you, Ariane, you bring a lot to our organization. I love working with you. There's something I want to share that can make you be even more effective. I want to have a conversation with you that will allow you to be more effective, contribute more, to et cetera, because I want that for you. You'll listen to that as opposed to, we got to talk about the mistake you made in the meeting. And so it's as Rohr would say, it's not what you do, it's how you do it.
It is how you do it. And there has to be a certain amount of personal growth to be able to engage that conversation, because you could teach somebody a technique of affirmative inquiry, but if it is not delivered with authenticity of somebody who actually inhabits what they're trying to do, which inhabits being an affirming person while they engage the work. And so I think I want to talk, just moving towards conclusion.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself now as a wholehearted person, and how do you maintain your own wholeheartedness?
Boy, I'm much more wholehearted. I'll say that. I would say I'm the happiest I've ever been. That's probably in my life. There are lots of things that go into that. I'm really lucky to be married to Laurie. I have 3 just amazing children and amazing sons-in-law and 4 grandchildren that I get to spend time with. Someone said being a grandparent's the only thing in life better than it's cracked up to be. And I would agree with that. And the privilege I get to spend, my work is such a privilege because I get to help people become better. And they notice it in themselves. And that's not for my ego. Oh, thank you, John, for making me better, because they do the work. We help them do the work. We support them in the work. But they have epiphanies. They change. They transform their organizations. And it's just to be witness to that and to be a part of that is just really an extraordinary gift. Yeah, I don't have any trouble getting out of bed in the morning to do this stuff. I really do.
Okay, what's one encouragement you want to share with people that supports you in your listening and being present?
I would say that an encouragement. So what supports me in my listening and being present? So there are 2 things. I do this. There are a couple of things I would say about it. One, there's an exercise that I was taught, which is to imagine a time in your life when you were most present in a conversation. So think back to where you were really locked in 100%. And for me, actually, it was a phone call. It was actually, and my son is very comfortable with being publicly gay. He's a pretty extraordinary guy. But it was when he called Laurie and I to come out. And the world, everything stopped, right? And I was there. So what the folks who were leading us through this exercise said was, okay, conjure that presence up in your mind and body and carry it down the hall when you're going to go have a feedback conversation with Sally. Be like that. So I would say to someone who is thinking about how do I listen more carefully, think about a time that you did, reflect back, and bring that up as your talisman, your symbol that you can, frame of mind that you can actually access and call on and bring with you where you go to the conversation. The second thing I would say is think about questions, ask questions, and the most powerful questions begin with the word what. So Rather, how did you bake that cake? What made you decide to bake a chocolate cake today? You just get a lot more information. So
Yes.
Those are two things.
How should people find you if they want to connect with you?
On LinkedIn, probably through LinkedIn.
Okay.
LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, John, for this conversation. It's a beautiful, I just love it. It's a great conversation. I loved everything you shared. I really appreciate some of these reminders around listening and presence and attention. And even what you were describing about listening and those two things, both of those are making a conscious, loving choice.
Correct.
Making a choice in how I be. It's making a choice.
Yeah, that's right. That's really right. When I think back on the example I shared of my listening, that was a moment of incredible love between my wife, my son, and me.
Yeah.
That was, something I'll never forget. You're amazing. You are one of the great gifts in my life. It's just the way that we met when you did a funeral for my dad and then came from that. Was just
okay.
A ride.
Since you brought that up, I'm sorry to interrupt you complimenting me. I shouldn't do that, but can I just share that? Because that was a transformative experience for me. And it's hard. I hear myself say that, and I know that this was your father's funeral. However, I remember this very clearly because he died on an Easter morning.
Yeah, correct.
And so I had scheduled a retreat for following Easter and all of the intensity of Holy Week services. And that retreat was a very beautiful, quiet time in a Carmelite monastery. And so when the funeral happened, it was the first thing I did upon reentry into the world. And because of being in silence and spending time with some literature that was akin to what we're talking about today, I listened to your eulogy in a way I had never listened before in a funeral service. And you delivered a beautiful eulogy at your father's funeral.
Thank you.
Remember that. And you also have a beautiful mom. So there was a lot of love in that room.
Yeah.
But it was the quality of listening to you speak and having the presence in the moment to then integrate what I hope to share as comforting words with the very comforting, loving, supportive words you had already shared. And that was a transformative experience for me. That was a gift that it's very strange. People can't understand they give these gifts to clergy. And we don't want to talk about them because they happen at the expense of loss and grief. But at the same time, this is part of how love works in the world.
How it works. And then I ran into a coffee shop about 2 months later. Yep. You had a Richard Rohr book in your hanging out of your purse. I said, we should get together and talk.
That's right.
What a ride.
What a ride.
What a ride.
Thank you so much, my friend.
This was fun.
This was awesome.
I'm not.
Hang out. Okay.
Thank you. Stop your recording.